Okay, so we're ready to go, and just so everyone knows, this session is going to be recorded. What I'm going to do is go through a couple of I guess, the protocol or guidelines or intro. Then I'll turn it over to Mayor Lowry, and I think she'll turn it over to our consultants, and we'll start from there. So please bear with us, folks. Zoom is not always, or virtual meetings are not always the best form for trying to manage multiple things, especially presentations. So there'll probably be a little bit of a lag in between the handoffs, and as well as we're moving from one document to the next, it may take a little bit of time for things to show up. So just be patient with us, and these things usually work out okay, as long as everybody gives everybody the benefit of the doubt and a little bit of patience as we go through. So again, I'm going to try and share screen, and we'll cover off a few items. So hopefully everybody's in the right place. OPA 29, which is our virtual information session. This is basically the outline that we're going to go through, except we're going to switch it up a little bit here in terms of a little bit of protocol, and then we'll open it up to the mayor's remarks. As I said, presentations from Mark Reveg, Gabrielle Snow, or our planning consultants from JLRichards. Then we'll do some Q&A and closing remarks by the mayor. Just so everybody knows, as an attendee coming into the session, it's automatically muted. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and on your basically your toolbar, and that's what we'll be using. So what happens is you can send those questions directly to us, and as we go through the presentation or as we open it up, you don't necessarily have to speak your question or what have you. You can send it to us in that Q&A box. Sometimes we can type an answer back to you, but if not, we'll hand it on. More than likely, your questions will be directed to either one of the consultants, and we can get them to answer it. There's also a raise hand function, and I'll show you where those are on your screen in the next slide or two. And that will simply indicate to us that you want to speak. What happens is you come up in the list of attendees, and we'll note that you want to speak by raising your hand. And what we'll do is when it comes your turn, we'll simply take you off of mute. We do that automatically, and we will put you over, and everybody will be able to hear you. As we say, like as that comes up, you'll be done in order, and we'll be able to see whose turn it is. So you don't have to worry about being in line, being ahead of anybody or anything like that. We can handle all those things for you. Next, going off, just to show you where the Q&A function should be, it'll be in this box basically at the bottom of your window. So you'll see it looks like a little, I think a Q&A or a couple of bubbles that you'll see. This is a window that'll come up, and you basically type your answer in the bottom. Like I said, if that's how you prefer to send questions to us, that'll work just fine. If you want to speak, like I said, we'll do it this way. We'll do the raise hand function. So you'll see that on this side, little hand, and you simply click that. It'll automatically notify us that you're in line, and it looks like it turns green when you'll see it. Sometimes it's a yellow hand, but I think it turns green when you're in line, and we'll know that you're next up. Okay. So Mayor Lowry, I think that kind of takes care of our protocol piece there. If you want to take it from here.
Sure. I can't seem to get my video to go, but as long as you can hear me.
You're coming through great, Mayor Lowry.
So I'll just like to start off by welcoming everybody. This is an unusual way to do an information session, but here in the days of COVID, this is the best we can do, and I appreciate that so many of you have come out today. So welcome to this info session on official plan number 29, official plan amendment number 29, I should say. And this is the review of our Prime Agricultural Area Designation. So we have, I think it was 56 that had registered for today, and I see there's still some people joining us. To give you an idea of who's in the room, we have municipal staff, we have members of council, our in-house consulting team from JLRichards is with us, and we have property owners, we have farmers, we have agribusiness operators, engaged citizens, and I believe the media are with us tonight as well. So Ken Kelly, our CAO, had introduced himself to you already. Once I'm finished my opening remarks, we will have Mark Rivet, who is the senior planner, working with us on this, and Gabrielle Snow, both from JLRichards, who will be doing the bulk of the presentation today. Just by a way of background, so tonight's information session will be looking at just one aspect of planning and change in Mississippi Mills. And as I say, it's the review of our Prime Agricultural Area Designation. One thing I'd like to make sure is clear for everyone is that Council has not made any decisions or changes to the agricultural or rural land designation at this point. Council and the public have the result of the work completed by our consultant team from JLRichards at this stage. And it is the wish of Council to hear from the property owners and the public at large about the implications of this work at this stage. Most importantly, we want to hear any detailed or additional information that people are aware of that could change the findings of this work. And just to take a step back, why are we reviewing the prime agricultural areas in the first place? And in short, the answer is because our agricultural mapping, the approach that's used to determine prime agricultural areas, is outdated and it's no longer accepted by the province. Some of you may remember when we were updating our prime agricultural area and corresponding agricultural mapping last term as part of the official plan review, that was OPA 21, the Agricultural Advisory Committee raised some concerns. So through discussions that the Agricultural Committee had with our planning consultant about those concerns, the Ag Committee recommended that Council update its approach to designating prime agricultural areas and the corresponding mapping using what's called a Lear, a land evaluation and area review. This is an alternative approach that's approved by OMAFRA. Lanark County, who is our approval body for planning matters, they accepted our official plan number 21 without the updated prime agricultural areas or agricultural mapping on the condition that Mississippi Mills would do so via a Lear. So they allowed us some time to be able to go through this process. Updating our agricultural mapping will also affect official plan number 22, the settlement boundary of the expansion of Almont. So working with OMAFRA and the County of Lanark, our planning consultants are using this alternative approach to update the areas. So it's the Lear that they're using as that approach. And this is what was recommended by both the Ag Advisory Committee, and then it's an approved method by OMAFRA. It's important to note that the proposed prime agricultural areas in OPA 29 is larger than what's in our current plan. And this means that some property owners will lose the potential to sever new lots once OPA 29 is approved. There will also be some property owners in Mississippi Mills who will gain severance rights. So property owners who may lose or gain severance rights will be sent letters to ensure that they are aware of this and they understand what steps they can take should they wish to do so. The purpose of the information session tonight is to discuss the prime agricultural area review, as we've mentioned earlier. This is the opportunity for you to understand the Lear, understand the methodology and the scoring, ask questions and seek any clarity you might need from our consultants. As I had mentioned, a really important part of the Lear is to receive feedback from landowners themselves, especially if the scoring doesn't seem quite right on particular lands. So this is an opportunity to recolor or redraw the map, you could say. There are valuable details that only those who know the land can share. And we need those comments so that tweaks and adjustments can be made to refine what we have in front of us today. This information session is not a statutory meeting. This is a step beyond the Planning Act requirements. And we're providing this to ensure that the public understands what the proposed amendment is. The purpose of this session is to inform the public to ensure you have full understanding of the material so that you can provide feedback and opinions on this proposed OPA. The time to do that is at our statutory public meeting next Tuesday, should you wish. Spring is always a busy and stressful time of year for farmers. This year, spring came early and has been quite dry, which means that farmers are on their fields sooner than usual. My brother and I were talking about the Lear last night, actually, and looking at maps when he came in from planting well after 9 o'clock. And I'm sure there's many of you on the call today that have been pulling similar kinds of hours. Both staff and consultants and members of council are aware and sensitive to the pressures on farmers this time of year. And a recommendation will be presented at our regular meeting next Tuesday, May 4th, for a revised timeline so that feedback can continue to be provided to staff, and there's ample time for anyone who is needing to communicate with staff and consultants on this. For our agenda this evening, as CEO Kelly had outlined, once I wrap up my my discussion here, we'll be passing it over to Mark Rivet and Gabrielle Snow from JLRichards. They have about a 40-minute presentation. I would say too that JLRichards has worked with the municipality for many, many years, from well before amalgamation, and they're instrumental to many of our planning processes. So I'm quite pleased that Mark is working with us, and I'm glad to be working with Gabrielle on this as well. So we'll take a short break after the presentation before opening up the floor to questions and answers, which CAO Ken Kelly will facilitate. There's almost an hour for questions. Because there are so many people on the call, I would ask you to be concise with your questions so that as many people as possible do have a chance. And if you're on here and if you can hear me, you're probably having no trouble with the Zoom link. But if you do experience any technical problems during the session, Chris Kerwin from JLRichards is available to help you out. His phone number and his email are in the message that came from Mark today about today's session with the link for today. So with that, I thank you again for joining us for this information session, and I will pass it over to Mark and Gabrielle.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Kelly. You just need to be unblocked.
To share? Is that what you mean?
Just my video's been blocked, but I can do it without video as well. Follow Mayor Larry's.
Just 1 second.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same situation. So I think everybody can hear me, but my video has been disabled.
Okay. I have no idea why your video has been disabled, but just hold on 1 second.
Ah, there we go.
Okay.
Well, it's scary to see your face pop up on a screen. I'm there twice now, so hopefully there's no echoes. I'm not too sure why I'm there twice, but that's okay. So while Gabrielle just prepares to get the PowerPoint slide prepared for the presentation, I just want to follow on Mayor Laurie's comments and actually see she pretty much summarized all of my intro as well. But important to note that this is a virtual information session, so it would be similar to an open house. We actually held an open house for the similar topic back in 2017 in the Old Town Hall, for those of you that might have participated. And as Mayor Laurie indicated, we, with the advice of Ag Committee and Council of the day, opted to not pursue the agricultural review at that time. And we are now at that point today. So just as a little bit of background, the current community official plan actually dates back to 2005 is when it was actually adopted by council and approved by the ministry in August of 2006. So the current agricultural mapping that's in effect today actually dates back to 2006. And as some of you might remember, it was actually done somewhat as a pilot project with Gary McTavish, who was the senior planner at Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So we're going to refer to that as OMAFRA. So OMAFRA had worked with the planner of the day, Mr. Forbes Simon and various community representatives and members of community and council to identify what was going to be the prime agricultural areas with the first community official plan following our post-amalgamation. And most of that agricultural mapping was based on the CLI mapping, so class 1, 2, 3 mapping, and known areas of farming. So it was very much of a curvilinear, if we can call it, type of designation. So some properties were partially designated agricultural, some were partially, some parcels were fully designated agricultural. So it depended really on the amount of class 1, 2, 3 soils that crossed farming areas and that were field verified at the time. So the CLI, what we call the Canada Lands Inventory Mapping for Mississippi Mills, is actually fairly accurate, as it was. Many parcels were field verified in the early 2000s. So as Mayor Larry indicated, when we worked on the 5-year review, going back to 2016, OMAFRA had, at that time, the province was the approval authority. So this is going before Lanark County had its official plan and was delegated approval authority over a lower tier official plan review. So in 2016, when we were working on the 5-year review, OMAFRA had commented that as part of the 5-year review and update to conform to provincial policy statement, that we did need to revisit the agricultural designation in accordance with provincial policy statements of the day. And one of the options in the provincial policy statement is to pursue the Lear methodology, which Gabrielle will explain just what the LE and AR means in Lear. And just to point out, it is a methodology that needs to be prepared with and approved by OMAFRA. So we have been working with Senior Planner John O'Neill from OMAFRA, had various workshop sessions with him, as the methodology itself has to be approved by OMAFRA before it can be used. Not to say that it's a final product, but it is something that needs to get approved by OMAFRA before we can actually draft a proposed revision to the agricultural designation and start the discussion. So as Mayor Laurie indicated, it is a draft. It is a draft based on a methodology that's been worked out with OMAFRA, but it is now up for discussions, and there will be a statutory public meeting following this. And as Mayor Laurie indicated, also we will be extending the circulation and submission of comment period after the public meeting, and depending on the outcome, might trigger either another information session or a public meeting. So we'll have to see. But we do have everybody's email. There's about 65 people that have registered for this information session that we are keeping informed, as well as various agricultural committees and organizations. So some of you might have actually received a note in the mail from the different farming associations of this session. So we had reached out, and we're very happy that they are assisting us and reaching out to the farming community as well. So with all that being said, I will turn this over to Gabrielle Snow, who has been the lead planner and GIS expert on the Lear methodology here, and who has been working various work sessions with OMAFRA on this approach. And she'll be able to, I think before we go to the Q&As, a lot of the questions that I'm seeing in the emails will be hopefully explained as she presents just what the Lear is, how the data was incorporated or inputted into the Lear, and how we've used what's called geographical information systems, which is basically GIS, which is parcel, basically using computers to map every parcel and identify scoring for each parcel. So I'll turn it over to Gabrielle, and we'll be back for a Q&A after this session. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. Hi everyone. I'm very eager to present what we've done so far for the Lear this evening. I'm going to share my screen so that I can share my presentation with you all. If Mark, you can just let me know when the presentation is visible, that would be great.
It's good.
You might want to just maximize your for presentation screen, but we can see it.
Perfect. Is this any better?
That's good, thanks.
Great. Okay. So basically, the outline of the presentation is we're going to start with some guiding objectives. We'll talk about what's included and what isn't included in the analysis as far as lands in Mississippi Mills. We'll also be looking at what the evaluation unit is. Basically, a score is attributed to each evaluation unit across Mississippi Mills. So we'll just kind of go over what the options are and what was selected for Mississippi Mills and provide a bit of justification as to why that was selected. Then I'll dig into what the LE and AR stand for in the Lear and what that means as far as the data that's included and the type of analysis that's done. Then I'll go into a little bit more detail about both types of factors, both the LE and the AR factors that were selected for the Mississippi Mills Lear, and provide a bit of background into how each individual factor was broken down and scored, and how that contributes to the total score. We'll also be looking at some preliminary results, which includes the scores, what scored above the threshold, what's been included, and what we recommend for inclusion in the Lear, and how that compares to the Lear that's current, or the Prime Agricultural Land Designation that's currently in place. So the guiding objective is to protect lands that have agricultural value and can support agriculture, and also are suitable in terms of basically the context of said lands. And we'll get into exactly what context means in a few slides. So what lands are included, which ones aren't? Well, the lands that are excluded are those that are considered settlement areas. So this includes village boundaries and subdivision lands. So as you see in this graphic here, Almont would be considered a village area, and that's not included in the analysis. And the subdivisions that surround Almont are also excluded. But as you can see, the remaining lands that aren't classified as village or subdivision have been included in the analysis and have been scored. So the evaluation that was used in our Lear for Mississippi Mills is individual ownership parcels. So the typical and more traditional approach used to be going by a raster. So in GIS, what a raster is basically a cell. It can vary in size. Typically, for this sort of analysis, it would be 100 meters by 100 meters. And the reason why we opted against this approach is that it leads to the partial designation of properties. So as a property owner, if just say several cells were to cover your property, it might mean that some cells would be high scoring, some would be lower scoring, and that could lead to a partial designation of a property, which when it comes to land use planning comes with a lot of negatives, one of which is severance. If only part of your property can be given severance rights, it kind of leads to a little bit of complication. And this is something that we wanted to avoid moving forward. So now let's go into what constitutes the Lear evaluation. So the first component is the land evaluation component. This looks at soil capability, so how conducive are soils to agriculture, and this relies on the Canada Lands Inventory soils classification, and we'll get into how this is broken down, but basically soils are classified classed 1 to 7 based on their capability, 1 being the strongest, 7 being the least strong, as well as an organic soils category. The second component of the Lear is the area review, and this looks at factors, this is the way I like to see it, it looks at factors that aren't necessarily having to do with soil, but are speak to the context of that general area and that parcel. So that might be, you know, site related things, whether that be on site or near site, that can affect a property's ability to be productive in agriculture and successful in agriculture. So OMAFRA has a requirement that the LE component, the land evaluation component, makes up at least 50% of the total score of the Lear. We've decided to make it 70%, just given how important good soils are to agriculture. We find that there's a strong correlation, and the previous prime agricultural lands designated in Mississippi Mills looked at the CLI data, which is the soil capacity data, completely and didn't consider anything else. So we thought it was important to really give preference to soil quality in the Lear. But also we left 30% of the Lear to area review factors. So these are site-related components or factors that would influence whether a property would be conducive to agriculture. So this is something that we'll get into a little bit more as we go, but we thought that these context-related factors play a secondary role in determining whether a property would be important for protection as agricultural land or not. And that's something that we'll discuss in a slide or two. So now to get into the land evaluation factor scoring. As you see here, and as I said before, soils are classified from 1 to class 7, as well as an organics category. Prior Lears don't always include this organics category. This is something that's new and mandated by OMAFRA for inclusion. And it's supposed to, organic soils are supposed to score as high as class 2 soils. So this is something that we did as a result of OMAFRA guidance. So what we see is that class 1 soils are given the full 70 points that they're attributed. The total Lear score is out of 100. And given that the land evaluation factor makes up 70%, if you're class 1 soil, you get the full 70 points out of 100. And if you're class 7, you get 0, and it kind of works its way up in terms of score from 7 to 1. And what you'll see here or what you'll see on parcels is that sometimes there's a mix of soils. So the score is reflective of that. So let's just say 50% of a parcel is class 1 soil and the other 50% is class 2. Well, then 50% of the score will be based on that 70 total and half will be on 63. So you'll have a total Lear or LE score in between 70 and 63 as your total. So now to get into the area review factors. Before getting into it, I just liked to include this slide just to discuss, what factors are common and what was brought forward as a factor in the Mississippi Mills Lear. So there are factors like the presence of farming infrastructure and the percentage of land in agricultural production. When it comes to the agricultural production factor, we thought that this wasn't necessarily reflective of the soil capability on the given parcel being evaluated. So this is something that we didn't really want to include. Farming infrastructure, though it is really important, ultimately, we didn't decide to include this, and the reason is it was a bit of a data limitation. The data that we did have wasn't completely accurate, and we didn't want to bank on that. But between what was a suitable factor and what data was available, we opted for parcel size, conflicting land uses, and the percent of a parcel actively being farmed as our 3 area review factors. And this is something that I'll get a little bit more into in the following slides. So between the 3 selected area review factors, they're all given an equal amount of points or possible points. So each factor is given a total possible score of 10 for a combined total of 30 points on the total of 100 points that make up the full Lear score. So to get into parcel size, the reason why this was selected was larger parcels are generally more conducive to agriculture. It doesn't mean that small parcels can't be, but there are some limitations in very small parcels that might also kind of indicate that they've already been fragmented. And generally, if there's more space, more can be produced, and these are parcels that are worth saving. But as you'll see here, parcels that are 81 acres or more are given the full 10 points, but smaller parcels are also given pretty high scores. So if small parcels, if a parcel is small, it's not necessarily going to be too penalized as a result of its size. As you'll see here, we do prioritize larger parcels, but the smaller ones still can score quite high. And it's important to remember as well that this is only 1/10 of the total score. So though it is a factor being considered, a smaller parcel won't be penalized too much as far as the total score goes. And this table was just included just to show how large farms and Mississippi mills are. So you'll see that, the 70 to 129 acre farms make up a roughly 30% of farms in Mississippi mills. And there are many larger farms, farms larger than 70 acres, which just shows that, our breakdown in terms of parcel size and scoring is pretty reasonable, and it doesn't exclude or penalize the small parcels too much at all. So the second AR factor is conflicting land uses. What we mean by this is anything that's considered open space, commercial, retail, industrial that's not located within settlement areas. It's important to note that conflicting land uses that are either within subdivisions or within village boundaries aren't considered conflicting in this case. As per MAFRA guidelines, these shouldn't be counted, as we don't want to create this sort of halo of no agriculture around settlement areas and subdivisions. So those have been totally blanked out from this analysis. So what remains are individual land uses that are within rural and agricultural areas in Mississippi mills. And we're looking at individual uses such as those in those areas. So around each parcel that's being evaluated, so each individually owned parcel, a 750 meter radius is drawn around that, and that's how the number of conflicting land uses is determined. So basically, if you have more conflicting land uses within the 750 meter radius around the parcel being evaluated, you're scored lower in this factor. So again, that's only out of 10 on a total of 100 points. So if you have 26 or more conflicting land uses within this radius, that gives you a score of 0. And if you have 5 or less, you get the full 10 points, and you can kind of see the breakdown between that. It's important to note that a lot of analysis was done to create these different ranges. We wanted to not penalize too many properties as per this score. So this breakdown was chosen so that a decent amount scored high, some scored low, and a lot of parcels scored in the middle. So generally, this is how the conflicting land uses were selected and analyzed under the Mississippi Mills Lear. So the final AR factor is active farming. So what this means is, what percentage of a given parcel that's being evaluated is currently being used for farming. This was done using 2 different data sets. So the first is the Mpac Code, which gives you an indication of both ownership and land use of the property. So within all of the codes provided by Mpac, those that are within the 200 series indicate that it's agriculture. So those were selected as a subset from total or all of the different Mpac codes. And of the 200 series, which are agricultural codes, we determined using the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's cropland data set to determine the percentage. So basically the Mpac Code determines whether it's agricultural or not. Those that are agricultural are taken. And then the cropland data set provides a coverage of agriculture. So it basically is just a data set that covers all land and indicates what the land cover is. So whether that's some sort of agricultural use, including livestock and crops, and also indicates other land cover. So that could be, developed land or streets and things like this. And basically this cropland data set was used to determine what percentage of each parcel was being used for farming based on the land cover indicated. So what we see here is that those parcels that have a higher coverage of agricultural use are scored higher in this factor. So those that are scoring 90% or more, 91% or more in terms of agricultural coverage and use get the full 10 points. And as the percentage of the parcel being used for agriculture decreases, so does the score attributed. So the breakdown is a little bit elaborate, just so that parcels aren't being penalized too much for a lower coverage. They're still getting some points on 10 if they're farmed at all to at any extent. So now to discuss some preliminary results. Here's a map that just shows total scores. So this doesn't necessarily mean or indicate or point to whether the land or the evaluated parcel will be designated as prime agricultural land. It simply just provides at a parcel level a score. So you can see here that generally in the east, parcels, individually owned parcels are scoring higher, and generally to the west they're scoring lower. And basically in the next slides, we'll see how that translates to the Lear in terms of designation. So to start, it's important to note that threshold was used in order to determine whether a parcel would be a strong candidate for designation. This threshold doesn't necessarily constitute a make or break in terms of whether it will be designated, but just provides a good indication of whether this is a strong candidate as far as scoring goes. But there are other factors that would either determine whether a parcel should or should not be designated, but this is just kind of a starting point to determine whether designation should be considered. But ultimately, we chose the 66 score or higher as the cutoff, just to give us a place to begin thinking about designation. And the way we got to this was we did do quite a few tests and analyses to make sure that this was an appropriate threshold. So what we did is we selected, based on our knowledge of given parcels and farms, we looked at what we thought would be very strong candidates for designation, strong candidates, not so strong, and not very good candidates for prime agricultural land designation. And ultimately, when we adjusted the threshold, we found that the right parcels were being recommended for designation under this threshold, and those that were poor candidates in terms of what we understood of those parcels, just as given local knowledge of those parcels, we knew that they wouldn't be strong candidates, weren't included or not made or weren't recommended essentially for designation using this threshold. So ultimately, this is what the threshold we chose based on those tests. And basically all of the parcels that are showing up as green are those that are either 66 or over, and therefore are surpassing that threshold value. So just to my point of, that threshold and score is not necessarily indicating or meaning that a parcel will be designated. We can see here that what is being proposed for agricultural designation is a little bit different from what surpasses that 66 plus score threshold. So essentially what is being designated looks at more than just the score, though it does use the score as a guiding kind of principle or piece of information. What we also did was consider 250 hectare blocks. So there's a theory that was put forth by OMAFRA that basically says that the 250 block hectare block is a strong approach, just because having this connected agriculture is it supports agriculture and is a big or critical for the success of agriculture. So as you can see here, there have been some high scoring parcels that were excluded from this recommended designation. And there also have been some parcels that have been included because they kind of are encompassed within 250 hectare blocks and therefore were put forth as recommendations for designation. And so finally, here's just a slide that compares and contrasts what is being recommended for designation under the Lear versus what is currently being designated as agricultural lands currently in Mississippi Mills. So what you'll see is that there are a few differences, especially on the side. You know, there's some areas here that aren't being recommended for designation under the Lear. Equally, there's some areas that the Lear is recommending that weren't necessarily designated or aren't currently being designated. But overall, you can see that there isn't a significant change between what was and what was designated and what is recommended for designation. And as was mentioned before, a larger total area is being proposed for designation now relative to what's currently being designated. So we're recommending that about 14,343 hectares be designated under the Lear, and currently 11,705 hectares are designated. This is essentially what I had prepared for this presentation, and Mark and I would be very happy to answer any questions that you have regarding how the Lear was constructed, the results, any just broad questions about the Lear in general. All of these things we'd be very happy to answer for you.
So thanks, Gabrielle. What we'll do now, I think, given that maybe you might want to refer to your slides as part of answers to questions, or Mark may want to, or individual people as they do ask questions may want to point out something. Maybe we'll just leave your screen on share now just to see how it works out. If it turns out that we don't need those supporting documents, then maybe we could turn that off and go back to kind of the group setting. Can Mark and Gabrielle, can either of you see the questions in our question and answer? Or would you prefer if I just read them out? Just remember, the attendees can't see the questions, so when answering a question, we should at least first read the question out before we get to an answer. So,
yes, Ken. So I can. I'm going to jump to one question right now while Gabrielle helps me answering this one. I just need to do a little bit of GIS research for one of the other questions, as it's a lot concession specific. Okay. So I do have my GIS up, and for all of you that are on. Hopefully you were able to try the GIS link that we created for this specific project. And if you do have any questions, again, Chris, Gabrielle, and I can assist in explaining or walking you through the GIS at any time after this virtual information session. But so one of the questions is, will there be concessions made for land that may be designated prime farmland that has marginal scrubland with frontage to be able to sever a lot off that area? So this goes back to the change in provincial policy statement that areas that used to be called poor pockets are no longer considered. So the short answer is no. Poor pockets or area of poor agricultural lands that are part of a larger agricultural area will not be permitted severance. So that partial designation of having the scrublands or the poor pockets designated rural and the balance of the lands designated agricultural is one of the significant changes in the provincial policy statement and in the proposed agricultural designation. The areas, and again, we are looking at areas that basically have 250 hectare areas. So that's why you're seeing now the proposed agricultural designation is larger blocks of land. The approach is that the entire parcel, if it scores and if there's justification or a rationale to include it as part of that 250 hectare area, would now be designated agricultural. And as most of us know by now, with the change in provincial policy statement over the past few years, the only consents or lot creation in prime agricultural is for surplus dwellings, where the farmland is consolidated with another farmer's property, or where the farm is significantly large and can actually create two farm holdings. So consents are no longer permitted on what we call the scrublands. So hopefully that answers that question. I have another question here which talks about lands that are currently zoned commercial C5. Will they be permitted to continue operating at a commercial capacity? So the project right now is at the official plan level. So we are looking at land use designation, so whether or not it is going to be rural versus prime agricultural lands. Zoning comes afterwards. So in accordance with the Planning Act, the municipality would have 3 years to implement these changes in terms of in its zoning bylaw. Existing uses maintain their rights. So if there is a lot that is zoned commercial or a lot that is zoned that would not conform with the agricultural designation, it can be recognized in the zoning bylaw if it is built. If it is vacant, becomes a little bit more of a discussion item with the approval authority to see whether or not that can be recognized or not, because the test of the zoning bylaw is to ensure conformity with the official plan. I have another question. Lots 8 and 9 of concession 2 and lots 24 to 25 of concession 4 scored very high on the Lear, but are not included in the proposed prime agricultural designation. I'm just trying to find those quickly here. Pakenham, Ramsey concession lot 2 and 4. So one of the reasons most likely is that it was just individual areas that did not create this larger area. That's not to say that they're not good farming properties. It's just to say that in terms of the Lear approach and OMAFRA's guidelines for creating larger areas, individual properties or properties that would basically be like a 25 acre or 40 acre parcel surrounded by lands that do not meet the scoring or the potential for agricultural use are not captured in this. So if you're looking, for example, at the current figure right now, a lot of the lands near Clayton, for example, although they might have some good agricultural potential, they're not being proposed as prime agricultural lands. That being said, the general rural designation permits the same uses as prime agricultural designation and doesn't have the same restrictions in terms of consent. So that's the big difference. Another question here is, if a landowner is currently running a home-based business that is not approved by OMAFRA, what will happen if the land is designated prime ag? Will we be forced to cease operating a home-based business? All depends on what the home-based business is, but a general answer to that is OMAFRA doesn't approve home-based businesses. The municipality is the approval authority for home-based businesses under its zoning bylaw. And if there's an existing home-based business, it is most likely permitted. Home-based businesses are permitted in the zoning bylaw, and home-based businesses are permitted on prime agricultural lands or existing dwellings within prime agricultural areas. The ministry has recently also prepared a guideline, which is to permit additional commercial and industrial uses on prime agricultural areas. So it is what we call agricultural related or on-farm diversified uses. So there are actually, OMAFRA has actually expanded the list of potential commercial industrial uses. The official plan makes high-level reference to these, so guidance would be given from this guideline called additional permitted uses on prime agricultural areas. There's another question that says, does the removal of prime ag designation from our from our farms change our municipal tax bill? What if the land is sold or passed down to future generations? So short answer to that is no. The official plan designations does not affect municipal tax bills. Mpac actually assesses the lands based on a different set of criteria, and therefore that would not, the designation, I'm not too sure what the question means in regards with passing down to future generations, but the if the land is sold or passed down to, yeah, I'm not too sure what the question is there, but no, short answer is no, the designation does not affect the assessed value or the municipal tax bill, to the best of my
Mark,
knowledge.
yes, and just further to that, Mark, I think on our public engagement site where we do have our additional documents posted, in our frequently asked questions, we do actually have a specific response to that. And if people want, I think there's some links in that answer to the question, which are to impact and how farms are assessed and whatnot. So I think there's a good deal of information available on this issue, particularly if people have maybe some more detailed questions, or if they want to see it on the Mpac website. There is more information that's available with regards to how a tax bill for a farm is developed and what the factors are for that. And I think basically it reverts back to, if somebody is a member of a farming association, that has more to do with your municipal tax bill than the Prime Ag designation of the land. But like I said, there's more information on our website, on our FAQs, that people can go to for that. Thanks, Mark. Continue on.
Yes. So there's another question, or not a question here, just a comment. Provincial Policy Statement 2020 reads, prime agricultural areas are areas where prime agricultural lands predominate, and prime agricultural land is defined as specialty crop areas and or Canada Land Inventory Class 1, 2, 3 lands. So yes, we don't have specialty crop areas in Mississippi Mills. We are using the prime agricultural land being class kind of CLI inventory class 1, 2, 3. The next section, or that next part of that definition, the provincial policy statement, is that the prime agricultural areas can also be identified using Lear, which is an approved methodology with OMAFRA, and that is the methodology we're using. The other change in provincial policy statement is that it doesn't only consider class 1, 2, 3, it considers class 1, 2, 3 where that area is predominantly class 1, 2, 3. So the application of that from the province is that areas of poor pockets, or areas that might not score or be designated as or identified as class 1, 2, 3, also form part of that larger agricultural area. How does this work with Lear proposal? So again, that's just a continuation. So the Lear is the process that we are undertaking. So as OPA 21, it was agreed that the Lear would be the methodology used to determine prime agricultural areas. So as presented by Gabrielle, the Lear uses class 1, 2, 3 as one of the main criteria, the 70% scoring criteria, and actually builds additional components to make the agricultural designation just that much more refined for Mississippi Mills. If a property was scored greater than 66, what would be the rationale for not recommending the land as prime agricultural area? So again, the Lear doesn't equal designation. The Lear is there to provide guidance on areas that should be considered for agricultural designation. And again, based on the existing agricultural designation was looked at to see where the prime agricultural areas are currently. It was to build on to what there was there using the Lear as the methodology. As indicated, those areas that are small parcels that would not create a larger community of agricultural lands were not considered. If you use the GIS, or you look at current Schedule A to the COP, most of those lands that are being proposed now are very, very similar to the current agricultural designation. A large part of the change is actually that the partial parcels are now either full or are not being designated. I'm unsure of why the potential future severances were included in the meeting package. It seems to affect more than just the proposed lands for agricultural. Can you talk to this? So yes, I can talk to this. The potential future severance is actually being completed, or was actually being completed. It was actually started in 2016. So it's been an ongoing exercise that JLR has been working with Lanark County Land Division Committee to identify where there have been severances since 1973 using our GIS system. So the intent or the purpose of starting this model in our GIS was to identify whether or not there were sufficient rural consent opportunities as part of OPA 21, looking at village boundaries and looking at consent opportunities in the rural area. And it's the same exercise that we were using and will be using for what's called OPA 28, which is the Rural and Village Policy Review that we've started. So that same figure is being used to identify which areas could potentially be affected by the addition or removal of agricultural lands, and also will assist in OPA 28 in identifying how many consent potential there is in the larger rural area and villages. Will anyone come out to the property to determine the actual classification? Are we only using the GIS? So this is in large part a desktop exercise, but based on either field verified information or valid sources, and those sources will or have been added to the back of the review so people know where our data source comes from. As indicated in the early 2000s, OMAFRA had done a lot of soil testing to confirm the class 1, 2, 3 soils, and that mapping is old mapping, but has been verified. It's 1970s mapping, but has been verified in 2000. It's not proposed as part of this exercise to do any parcel investigation. Just there's approximately 4,000 parcels, give or take, that are part of the agricultural project right now. So I don't see any other questions at this time.
Yeah, so Mark, was there anything, or Gabrielle, was there anything in general that you guys wanted to touch upon? I know we did talk a little bit about in I think some of our sessions and whatnot. You know, what happens if a parcel is scores low, and you know, say a parcel comes up at a 40 mark or something like that in terms of the analysis, yet we still want to include it in as the prime or as a designation. I think you've covered off some of this in terms of sometimes a parcel may be surrounded by other land and we include it in a 250 hectare block. Would that kind of be the only instances? Like, are we going to see these 250 hectare blocks split in any way, or are there partial 250 hectare blocks that we can see, or are we going to stick with the mark that a 250 hectare block is going to be fully designated as prime ag? And are there any ways or proportions that we're going to split a block? Any caveats around that? Just kind of wondering if that
yeah, so very similar to the Lear, where a 66 number was used to say whether or not it had sufficient components to consider the designation. The 250 hectare area is also a number that's proposed by OMAFRA, same as OMAFRA's guidance that a parcel or farm holding should be 40 hectares. So those are not numbers that are in Planning Act or provincial policy statement. Those are numbers that OMAFRA provided as guidance based on farming operations in Eastern Ontario. It's not to say that a 10 hectare farm could not be an active, viable farm operation. It's more of a general standard approach that 40 hectares is an appropriate farm size. But the Planning Act or the provincial policy statement does provide lesser size farming operations. We've seen either apple orchard farms or even greenhouse agricultural uses that don't require 40 hectares. But in general, 40 hectares is the number. So to go back to the 250 hectare areas, it is possible that an area might be less than 250 hectares, but generally we are looking at minimum maintaining 250 hectare areas. And where the line stops is where there is either a natural severance. A river, for example, is an easy severance to calculate in the 250 hectare area. A large grouping of parcels that would score very low is another good use of an area. A highway, but even some larger roads, collector roads, arterial roads, rural arterial roads, it was felt by OMAFRA that those would not be a constraint, and that parcels on either side of a county road, for example, would not be separated from the 250 hectare area. I'm starting to get more questions, so hopefully that answered a bit the 250 hectare area. But again, Lear doesn't equal designation. It's really just we use it and then we start kind of shaping what the designation could be. There's a question regards with, can you talk about severances based on houses and buildings considered as access to farming operations? So the Planning Act and provincial policy statement does permit severances for what's known as surplus dwellings. So a surplus dwelling would be a situation where there is a current agricultural operation and the farmer either chooses to retire or just leave the agricultural business, and the house then and the farm is then sold or consolidated to another farmer. It doesn't need to be an abutting farmer. It could be a farmer from a different municipality. It could be another farmer from Mississippi Mills, but where a farmer needs additional lands, and the farmer would be purchasing that property but does not need the dwelling. He's purchasing the land. So the province does permit the surplus dwelling, so you would basically create a consent to sever that surplus dwelling from the farm operation, and that generally it's a 1 or 2 acre parcel around that house, just sufficient for the well and the septic and maintaining more of a rural residential property, and then the farm would be consolidated with another farming operation. The province does require that an appropriate method be used to ensure that there's no future dwellings on that property. So the common approach is to rezone the farm to prohibit any future dwellings on the farm. So it's really where a farmer is now increasing his farm landholding. Question is, if a parcel score is less than 66 but is designated as prime ag lands due to being within the 250 hectare block, is there a way of having it not included in the classification? So yeah, so if it's a parcel that is, for example, on an edge of a larger area, and a lot of those are arbitrary. There is potential, or there is possibility, this is not carved in stone, so there is possibility to look at individual parcels. Where it gets a little bit more difficult is if that parcel is in the middle of a larger area. The province is looking at avoiding to have either poor pockets or individual parcels of conflicting land use within a larger agricultural area. So individual parcels within a larger area would be captured as part of the agricultural designation. But edge properties or even strips of lands that could be considered as general rural rather than prime agricultural can be considered. So OMAFRA has indicated where local knowledge or justification is provided to explain why a parcel shouldn't be, can be removed as part of this exercise.
So Mark, just before you jump on to the next one, just for people's information as well, we didn't really cover off kind of the next steps in this process, and we are going to do that. I did see a couple of questions kind of with regards to what happens after this, and we're going to kind of we're going to do speak to all that at once. So we're just going to deal with a lot of the technical questions I think that people have about, the scoring, the 250 hectare blocks, the 66 number and things like that. Then we're going to kind of put a pause and go to kind of the next steps of the process. So we will cover that off. So just be patient with us, folks.
Yes, a question is, if Lear doesn't equal prime ag, how is prime ag designations, or when will prime ag designation be proposed? So OPA 29, which is the official plan that is proposing the new designation, does provide, so what's on the screen right now is, so the green is the proposed agricultural designation. So the Lear, basically, as Gabrielle indicated, it was used to determine what would be an appropriate agricultural designation for to initiate public consultation. So what we have on the screen right now are in OPA 29. So most of you have either seen the public meeting notice, and OPA 29 is included on the website or can be provided. It's basically the Lear is the supporting information, and the OPA 29 is, there's a few policy revisions just to update the policies, but in large part, it's a replacement of Schedule A, which will change what the general rural areas are and what the prime agricultural areas are. So the Lear was used to assist in determining the new Schedule A. There's a question of why could we not put a house on a small scrub land within agricultural areas? So this is actually something that was discussed with OMAFRA and different provincial partner ministries, as well as the Union of Agricultural Producers when provincial policy statement 2014 was produced. And the reason they removed the surplus the scrublands or the port pockets was actually in large part requested by the farmers to avoid having conflicting land uses within a larger farming area. The issue with introducing a house within a larger farming area is once that farmer wants to actually build a barn, expand onto his barn, or locate a manure storage facility, he now has a conflicting land use, which forces him to increase setbacks, sometimes even making it very difficult to build a barn or a manure facility because dwelling or any other sensitive use has been introduced into the agricultural area. If talking about splitting blocks, 3/4 of the block east of Appleton is currently farmed, but the block is not proposed to be designated. Will a situation like these be individually assessed? So if through review, if you feel that some parcels or some edge properties like the one being talked about here, 3/4 of the block is farmed, but the block is not proposed to be designated, then for sure we can consider those. OMAFRA for sure would agree and support additional agricultural lands. That's their mandate, to protect the prime agricultural land. So if it is agricultural lands and the owner would rather have it designated prime agricultural lands, then yes, that can be considered. In a similar fashion, if a property is being proposed for prime agricultural lands and there's justification to why it shouldn't be prime agricultural lands, as long as it doesn't really as long as it's not really affecting the larger area, it can also be considered for removal.
So Mark, just before we continue on, I think actually the next question, Gabrielle might want to take that one, but I was going to say with regards to process. So just so people know what we're planning here, usually what happens, this is an information, and as Mark and Gabrielle both stated at the beginning, this is not part of the statutory or the legislative piece. This is an additional thing that we wanted to do to try and make sure that people were prepared for the public meeting. So the public meeting is coming up on May 4th, and that happens at the council meeting. So if you want to make a formal submission, that is the meeting that you should be targeting for that. So while this meeting is being recorded, these are not taken as formal submissions. What we mean by that is the consultants, as part of these processes under the Planning Act, have to consider the comments that people make. So if you want your comments, and this is kind of speaking to some of what I'm seeing here in the questions, which is, if I don't agree, what do I do? What's my avenue to dispute or to bring up additional information? And that's really what we want to do. So after the public meeting, we were going to have the full month of May as a comment period. But I think what you're going to see at the meeting on May 4th is we're going to be looking to, and this will be a discussion amongst the councillors, they'll make this decision. They'll be looking to do more consultation. Now, the exact date that I think we're going to arrive at is basically what is going to be debated on Tuesday night, May 4th. But what we're doing as part of this stage is priming people or giving you a verbal understanding or presentation of the material, so that when we get to the public meeting on Tuesday, May 4th, you're not seeing it essentially for the first time or hearing this presentation for the first time. We're trying to give people as much advanced information as we can so that you come to the meeting prepared and you understand where the consultants have come from in the development of their proposal. And that's what this is. I mean, this is their view of taking a lot of data and making some assumptions and putting it together to give us a very, very good representation of what our prime ag lands are. Now, as we're saying, just because it scores a certain way doesn't mean that it automatically is designated or automatically isn't designated. And that's the purpose of the comment period after. We want to hear from property owners, we want to hear from the public, why you think a piece of land is designated and it shouldn't, or isn't designated and it should be. And that's really what this comment period is going to be about. So Mark, I don't know if you want to speak to this more, but the process that will happen is a public meeting on Tuesday, May 4th. There will be an extended comment period. Usually what happens with these things, if you remember, say OPA 22, which is what we recently did, we went through a public meeting. We also had an info session before the public meeting, but basically the consultants came forward with a document to the committee of the whole or the council. The very next meeting, basically summarizing all of the public comments. We're going to give an extended period of time for that public comment. So that means we're going to push out that report from the consultants for several more months so that people have enough opportunity to look at this data. And as Mark indicated, there's a very good tool, a link to a CGIS it's called, on our public engagement that people can go and look, and you can drill down into that to the exact parcels and get the, I think the scoring is on that as well, Mark, and people can see what the scoring is. And if you do have any questions, as Mark has offered, him and his team can help you with that if you do have questions. But after that comment period, that's when JLRichards, Mark and Gabrielle will come back to council with that public comment report. That document is tabled. Council gets to ask the consultants questions. Then it will go for another 2 weeks before council actually makes its decision. And then we're going to be dealing with the county. And Mark, I don't know if you want to talk about the county process as well. And if I did have that public comments report and then go to council, correct. But maybe you might want to pick up either you or Gabrielle on the next stage once it goes to the county.
Yeah, I can either explain that or right now at this point, or continue some questions, whichever. But in terms,
let's cover off the process, because a number of people were asking about process, and then I want to touch back on that.
In terms of process, so Mississippi Mills or Lanark County now has what's called the Lanark County Sustainable Community Official Plan. So that is what's called an upper tier official plan. And that official plan provides guidance to all of the lower tiers. So Mississippi Mills, in this case, in Lanark County, would be considered a lower tier. And the lower tier has to conform with the upper tier plan. So currently, the Lanark County Sustainable Community Official Plan has a schedule, a rural schedule, which is called Schedule A, which identifies its rural lands across all of Lanark County and the agricultural lands across all of Lanark County. Being that that was the first official plan at the county level, their agricultural designation for Mississippi Mills was they simply took the 2006 designation. There was no review or Lear or any other study. They took the existing agricultural designations to create what was called the first upper tier official plan. Now that we want to visit and make modifications to the Mississippi Mills agricultural designation, in order for it to still conform with the upper tier plan, we will have to submit an official plan amendment to the Lanark official plan in order for them to change their Schedule A, which would then permit us to have our Schedule A revised to conform to their schedule. So what happens is once there is clear direction from council in regards with the proposed agricultural area, we will be submitting a Lanark County official plan amendment, which will simply be a schedule change to the Lanark County official plan in order to have both agricultural areas match up. In terms of appeals, the official plan both at the county level and at the lower level are subject to appeal. There is a local official plan amendment and an upper tier official plan amendment. Keep in mind, however, that the Mississippi Mills Council does not have approval authority on official plan amendments. Those are delegated from the province to the county. So the county is the one that can adopt, approve with modifications or refuse a lower tier amendment and the upper tier amendment. So that's a bit in terms of the process. Did I answer that with enough detail?
I think so, but I just had a little bit of a bad connection there, Mark.
Oh,
I think we had to restart. I think our questions and answers are still there. Our attendees seem to still be here. So Mark, you can still hear me okay?
yes. So
Okay.
I can jump back to some questions, and if people want clarification on the process or the timeline, just throw the question in the Q&A, and I can get back to it.
Well, just one thing kind of before we move on to the next question, and that was with regards to the Agricultural Committee. There was a question with regards to that. And basically the question was, what's the involvement there of the Ag Committee? So we did make a presentation to the Agricultural Committee, the same format, essentially about a week ago. I believe that meeting was recorded as well. And what we have is they're now considering the report, and I believe they're going to bring forward some comments to council on that. I'm not sure what their timeline is for that, but that's also part of one of the reasons why we're extending out the timeline for this. There's going to be ample time for people to have their say in this process, and for particularly individual property owners to bring forward their concerns. And I'll kind of reiterate what Mayor Lowry said in her opening remarks, is that we realize that this is a little bit of an early season for many people, and that people are busy at this time of the year. And we're not going to, as far as I understand, not going to rush this, and council is going to have a debate on this on Tuesday evening, and hammer out some timelines and some dates for when things are going to come up. So Mark, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, but just so that people have an understanding, because I am getting a sense in some of the questions that people are concerned that either they have to make their case here tonight, or that they have to make their case for their land on Tuesday night. And that's simply not the situation. There is going to be ample time for people to get the information that they need, or to develop information to feed into this process. While we're more than likely not going to go out on everybody's individual parcel of land and do soil sampling, I do think that if people have information that they want to share and make submissions, that we'll be taking them, and the consultant team will be evaluating them.
Yes, so I have another question is, will there be a more detailed breakdown presentation? So no, as Mr. Kelly indicated, this was a virtual info session to explain the Lear methodology. There is the full comprehensive Lear report as part of OPA 29. As we are moving forward with this process, we will also be receiving additional comments from OMAFRA, from the county, from the Ag Committee, and from individual submissions, which will then assist in refining and updating the Lear methodology, or the Lear report, and confirming whether or not there is a proposed change of policy or Schedule A or designation. So also to add to that, the invitation tonight did have a link to an ArcGIS program that Chris Curran from our office created. So it is arcgis.com, and once you go on there, we did add specific layers that we felt were of interest to this project. So it is specifically tuned for this project. And if you do go on a specific parcel, either by address or just by searching, similar to any Google Earth map type approach, if you click on a parcel, it will give you the full breakdown of each of the components that Gabrielle described, and you will see the total score. And you can either add the existing agricultural designation, you can overlay with the proposed agricultural designation, you can see the changes of where the changes are, and so on and so on. And again, if you have any specific parcel questions or just general questions, our emails and you all have my email since you're on the invitation, so you can just send me an email or a note, and Gabrielle or I or Chris can assist with the GIS or explaining more specific questions.
Gabrielle, just going to say, we don't seem to be referring back to any of the presentation of the documents. If you wanted to stop sharing that one, it's up to you.
Sure.
There you go.
And if there are any questions that relate directly to the presentation or some of the mapped content, there's no issue. I can always just share again.
Well, yeah, perfect. I was just going to say there is one question on the, what's the justification for the 250 hectare grouping? I think you did touch upon that as relating to OMAFRA, but maybe you might want to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so it is an OMAFRA recommendation. So as indicated, OMAFRA sets our parameters, similar to when we do an actual official plan and zoning bylaw. The 40 hectares is also guidance from OMAFRA. So the 250 hectares is guidance from OMAFRA, and it's based on their knowledge and experience of farming in Eastern Ontario. That is a representative size of a larger agricultural community where they're trying to avoid having conflicting land uses. So it's not a fixed number, but it is a target number that they do want us to consider when we do convert the Lear scoring to a designation. So I have another question here in regards with surplus dwellings. What if we are no longer designated prime agricultural? So if you're no longer designated prime agricultural, by default, you are going to be designated general rural. General rural does permit consents. So if you are a general rural property or being changed from ag to general rural, you would be allowed the 2 lots plus retained severance policies. So if there is an existing dwelling, it wouldn't be considered a surplus dwelling. It would simply be considered a consent to create a new residential lot. Whether or not there's a dwelling or not, then that's always a possibility. There is a specific date as to when parcels can be created from original lots of record. I believe by memory it's 1973. So if there has been 2 new lots created from an original lot of record dating back to 1973, then it is not subject to consents of general rule. So that is parcel specific. So it's hard to give a generic answer, but the change from ag to rural would permit the potential for rural consents. Was there consideration given to expanding hamlets to curb building on houses on every municipal road on prime farmland? So as part of OPA 21, that was the 5-year review. That's where the boundaries of the different settlement areas was looked at. And there was some slight modifications made as part of OPA 21 in 2019. So as part of the agricultural project, there is no discussions or consideration of revising settlement area boundaries for the rural settlement areas, that is, so the different villages. So no, there is no considerations at this time to expand any hamlets based on direction from the OPA 21, the 5-year review. Most of the growth in Mississippi Mills is being focused to Almont. 70% of the new growth will be directed to Almont, and that is part of OPA 22, which Council has just passed, which is with going to Lanark County soon for their review and approval. So that was the comprehensive review in OPA to look at urban boundary. But there is no indication that any of the village boundaries would be reviewed or be expanded. There is still the possibility of building a dwelling on an existing lot of record, both in the rural or in the agricultural, as well as there is the possibility of creating new rural residential lots in the general rural area. If my property is designated prime ag, will I be able to construct new buildings to expand my operation? Assuming this is an agricultural operation, so for sure, if it's an agricultural operation, whether or not you're general rural or general or prime agricultural, yes, both designations do permit farming, do permit buildings and so on per the zoning bylaw. The only restrictions to any new or expanding agricultural buildings or manure storage facilities is the minimum distance separations. And those apply today as they will tomorrow. So that is a formula by OMAFRA, which looks at separation distances between a barn and a dwelling and vice versa. So if there are existing dwellings, then you would have to also separate any future barns or manure facilities from any existing dwellings, which is again the reason why we're trying to avoid having conflicting land uses in prime ag areas. Will individual parcel Lear scoring be available for landowners? So yes, if you can use the ArcGIS, you can actually go to every parcel and see the scoring. If you have difficulties with that, you can call us and we can give you an email breakdown or over the phone breakdown. So that is available. So local knowledge, what is the source for local knowledge? So in large part, it's data that has been produced through various sources, either through Mpac or through CLI mapping, or there's other sources, and those all those reference materials will be or have been added to the comprehensive review. A large component of the proposed agricultural designations is very, very similar to the existing agricultural designations, because those did go through consultation and field verification in the early 2000s. So if you do look at the current versus proposed, a large component of those are identical. If I don't agree with the process, who do I speak to or share my concerns? As Mr. Kelly indicated, this is simply a virtual information session where we're explaining the Lear, the process, and the approach being taken. The statutory public meeting, which is May 4th, is an opportunity for people to share their comments, which go to council and which we will provide responses to as part of a future report. The current and recommended maps do not line up. The recommended map covers less area. So the difference from, if I don't have the full background, but Tanika, you can follow up with me. But the difference between the GIS and the OPA 29 is, in terms of areas, is the provincially significant wetlands are its own designation in Mississippi Mills. So the area before the prime agricultural lands was following parcel boundaries, and some of those parcels have provincially significant wetlands. So those areas were carved out, and the only designation will be PSW, not, there was no overlay system or there was no double counting. There's also two areas that were identified that the golf course that initially was, it's all one parcel, and the golf course near Carlton Place had been included as fully prime ag, but because of parcel ownership. But apart from that area, and then there's a small one, I think, northeast of the Burntlands ANSI. Again, those are based on parcel fabric ownership. Apart from that, they should match up.
And one thing, Mark, that I'd like to add is, I'm not sure if that question also is relating to what's currently being designated versus what is recommended. If that's the case, more lands are being recommended for designation as than what's currently being designated. And as Mark said before, one of the reasons is that some parcels that were given partial designation are now being fully designated. So that's just one thing I wanted to add real quick.
So there's a question, can we also show constraints on the mapping? So constraints is there. So if you do go on the ArcGIS, ANSI's is a layer that can be turned on. So it is there. Is there a map with proposed changes to severance eligibility by specific land parcels? So yes, if you go to the Q&A section for this project, there is a question that asks about what happens with consents, and there is a link to the consent figure. It does show which ones are being proposed to lose consents and which ones, based on policy, could be considered for consents. Again, this doesn't mean that it qualifies, it just means that it hasn't had its 2 parcels from the original date of 1973. So it technically meets policy. Doesn't mean we haven't looked at it from a servicing perspective or from an MDS perspective. So not every parcel was investigated in terms of whether or not if an application for consent was submitted. We have not reviewed and cannot review 4,000 parcels or even 50 or so parcels to see. So it would be up to the individual landowner to determine whether or not there's been severances from the original date of record and whether or not there's any potential MDS conflicts with creating new lots. But in general, what we've shown is the ones that would be going from rural to ag or from ag to rural, and the ones that are going to rural that have not received consents in the past. For areas not assigned prime ag, at which score would it be possible to construct a dwelling, or is it any area not designated? So the scoring on the Lear again does not affect whether or not it will be zoned or whether or not a dwelling will be permitted. The Lear score is just again a tool for guiding the designation. Both general rural and prime ag would permit the construction of a new dwelling if it's an existing lot of record. So there's no change in terms of permissions there. If I have already severed a lot with no buildings, am I still able to build a residence? So again, same question. So yes, if there's an existing lot of record, the zoning bylaw does permit a dwelling. Again, the only caveat, and that applies today as it would after this exercise, is minimum distance separation. So that might affect the location of the dwelling on the lot, because even if it's an existing lot of record, minimum distance separation still applies. Is there a map showing the 250 hectare areas where each block starts and finishes? Gabrielle, I don't believe we've got a 250 hectare map figure. I don't believe so.
No, we don't have a map showing this. Essentially in GIS, we basically just combined parcels or added up parcels in order to verify whether there are 250 hectares. So this isn't something that was necessarily drawn, but it was just through analysis and visual interpretation that the 250 hectare blocks were determined, but they aren't kind of a standalone data layer.
I believe I've answered this question on the screen as well, Mr. Kelly, so it's the same question. All right. So I don't
Okay,
have
so there's no further questions in our Q&A. Mark, I think you've covered most everything. Was there anything else maybe you or Gabrielle wanted to touch upon?
The only thing I'll add at this point is like I said, we've had, I believe, 4 or 5 work sessions with OMAFRA, being the partner ministry that Lanark County will be referring to for guidance on the Prime Agricultural Designation. They have reviewed the final draft methodology. They have concurred with all but 2 of the criteria that we have to do slight revisions to. They're not significant revisions. They're more in terms of some of the criteria or some of the ratings to 2 specific criteria, which are more in the AR. So that will be done as will review and consideration of the agricultural committee's comments and any additional public submissions that we get throughout this process. So rather than just continually amending the report and amending the designation, it's proposed to basically compile a full set of comments and deal with those as one revision. and then bring that additional revision forward for discussion. So it's easier than having multiple versions with partial changes, as we never know exactly what the final version is. So right now there's, based on the Planning Act, there is a requirement that when we do the public meeting notice, so what was done a month ago was the public meeting notice, that a copy of the proposed amendment also be made available so the public can have something to comment on. So that is what we refer to as draft OPA 29. Again, once it does leave Mississippi Mills, so once it does get sent to Lanark County, the Planning Act does provide Lanark County with up to 6 months to review and approve, or approve with modifications, or refuse the OPA. So there is a long, it's not a quick turnaround. In the interim, nothing changes. The existing designations and the existing zoning remains. There's no discussions of putting an interim control bylaw or freezing any of the agricultural rural areas pending this project. So that being said, if there are parcels that I don't want to say, but if there are parcels that would be subject to consents, and they're concerned that they might lose those consents, well, there is a 6 to 9 month window here where consents can be considered, because it is pretty clear that once it is agricultural designated that unless it's for surplus dwellings or to create another farm property, consents for dwellings will not be permitted.
Okay, perfect. Mark, I think Mayor Lowry is on the line, or on the meeting again. I know she was pulling double duty tonight at the county as well. So I think we don't have any more questions in our Q&A. I think we've covered a lot of ground here tonight, Mark. So appreciate that. I think I'll ask Mayor Lowry if she wants to have any final words or close us out.
Sure, thanks, Ken. And I was able to catch a bit of this meeting before or after the county meeting adjourned here, so I did catch some of the conversation. But I do want to thank Mark and Gabrielle for their presentation, and certainly thank everyone for participating and for your questions tonight as well. Excuse me. Oh, hold on, my computer just froze on me. Just give me a sec here.
Yeah, we can still hear you, Mayor Lowry. You're still coming.
Oh, okay, good. You can still hear me? Okay, good. I wasn't sure what was happening there. Anyway, as I was saying, I just wanted to thank Mark and Gabrielle for the presentation, and thank everyone from the public who's joined us for this information session this evening. Mark has been available for questions leading up to this evening's session, and will continue to be available should you have questions that weren't addressed this evening, or something that comes up after this evening for you, or if you'd like to discuss your property specifically. Please do feel welcome to reach out to Mark. Mark's report and all the information presented tonight is available on our website, as will be the video of this evening's information session. So all of this is on the website. So if you want to review something, if you want to hear the answer to a question again, or for people who couldn't join us this evening, we have that available. All of those materials can be found under the public engagement page on the municipal website. And to repeat from earlier, the statutory public meeting for the proposed official plan amendment number 29 is next Tuesday, May 4th. The purpose of that meeting is to give the public an opportunity to make comment or statements that will be on the public record. Due to COVID, the public meeting will be held differently than usual, of course. The public is asked to provide comments in writing to Mark Revet and reference OPA 29 in your email to him. You may also register to speak at the meeting if you would like to do so. Like all our council meetings, it will be live streamed, and the public is welcome to watch that online. No decisions of council will be made next week regarding the official plan amendment, other than what I had mentioned earlier about defining the timelines and being sensitive to planting season. But the matter itself will not be decided upon next week. Public meetings are here as an opportunity really for the for the council to hear from the public. It's not about council having discussions at that point. A report which includes consideration of the public feedback will come before council at a later date. That will be when the discussion of council occurs. And I do just want to underline as well that keep in mind that comments and feedback about the report or about your specific property can continue to be provided to Mr. Rivet well after the public meeting date, up until a decision is made by council. Those will be on the public record as well. And as for next steps, once council has made a decision on the prime agricultural areas, the next step there is that the official plan amendment would be submitted to Lanark County for their review and consideration, since they are our approval authority for planning matters. If the county agrees with the analysis and the reasons put forward to justify the decisions, then council can amend the official plan. So to make sure you're aware of the upcoming conversations and to stay informed, I'd encourage you to sign up for our daily e-newsletter. You can do that right on the website, mississippi.mills.ca/subscribe. And with that, I thank you again for your attention, for your questions, and I look forward to your comments next week and in the weeks following. And I wish you a great evening. Stay safe and be well, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Lowry. And just one thing on posting of the video, it is going to be a little bit of time. We did have a little bit of a hiccup partway through the meeting. I am recording it and it looks like I lost connection. So there's probably going to be at least 2 segments to this video. So we're going to have to make that work tomorrow. So if you are looking for this video tomorrow, be patient with us again, as we're going to have to upload that. And with that, we'll close it out, Mayor Lowry. Yeah.
That sounds great.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Lowry.